Get ready, it's time to be woke. Take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Good morning. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I am Andy Kennedy, and it is a very strange Friday. Fuck It Friday doesn't do it justice. We had a huge dump of snow here last night, and so I've spent the better part of my morning out blowing the driveway out, so I'm a little disheveled, so you'll have to excuse that. And also feel the need to pre-apologize for any bandwidth issues that we have. I don't know if the storm has taken away some of my bandwidth issues, but we're running a little late this morning because of my feed freezing, and so if that happens during the show, apologize, and hopefully I don't think it'll be a problem if I am out for a few minutes. Carrie could probably cover it. I'm sure she could probably take care of it. So anyways, welcome. We've got a lot to talk about this morning as usual, and that starts with the introduction from my lovely and talented co-host, Mrs. Gary Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Hey, good morning, Andy. Good morning, everybody who's tuning in this morning. So, there's a nor'easter going through, so it's hitting bandwidth for Andy this morning. So it might be a little bit glitchy, but this is really an important topic because I have personally witnessed a whole lot of white people once again need a refresher with their performative allyship and their white fragility. So what I'm hoping to do is have this conversation in a safe space where if you as a white person see in yourself in some of these examples, it's not necessarily a judgment of who you are in totality as a person, but I do want you to re-examine how we think about things, because let me say this, it's not your fault. You have been raised in a culture that reinforces racist views that you may not realize have caused you, particularly on the left, to believe that you're being a good ally when in fact you're actually making it worse.
Right. It's you're raised in the state of PS, and that doesn't stand for PlayStation. That stands for propaganda state.
That's exactly right. And I'm coming from okay, so I spent my early childhood in the U.S., but then I moved overseas, and coming back to the United States once I was an adult, wow, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, it's all groups of people, and there's so much division and tribalism here in the United States that it's overwhelming. To call it a culture shock is not accurate. So I want to kind of piece through some of these things, and I'll be honest, we're even having this discussion within our own group this morning, which is weird because having to illustrate these points and how the actions and statements that are being taken not only cross the lines into performative allyship and white fragility, the toxicity part, but also go into censorship, which I would think no one in the independent media should be in any way, shape, or form supporting censorship when it comes to political views and things like this, right?
Completely agree. I completely agree.
Yeah,
and that just emphasizes that we need to have more discussions like this, if the need for them even exists within our own groups with people that are like us, right? So that's my always my biggest thing. As a progressive, you always want to make sure that you're always open to new ideas and Carrie, you've heard me say this before, right? Everybody has an opinion, and your opinion's like an asshole, right? But where they differ is that your opinion should be examined on a daily basis. And you should never be afraid to change your opinions, right? If you are learning or your mind is open to new concepts, new ideas from people that you have discussions with, right? Right now we live in a society where things are so tribalized that all minds are closed, and unless people sound exactly the way I sound, and I want nothing to do with them. And that's not a growing society. That's not a society that learns from their mistakes and moves on from them, right? And right. We're obviously going to get more into that. But.
Yeah, exactly. And this is part of that learning process, right? And I have been in the situation myself where I have said something that was not reflective. It was miscommunication on my part, where I've said something that somebody who doesn't know me doing that 2-second read that we see on Twitter, Facebook, and everything else, in that 2-second read, I guarantee you 99% of the time you're going to be wrong about that person. So if we're not extraordinarily careful, and a lot of us aren't, we just do that knee-jerk reaction because social media, the communication style on social media is like the end cap at the grocery store. It's there for you to make a last-minute emotional purchase about something you don't really need, don't really want, but it's there in front of your face. And so the same thing happens with social media. We have that emotional knee-jerk reaction, and we do a 2-second read on the person and identify everything about them from 140 characters. And that is never the right answer, but we do it. And that is exactly what the social media channels make money from. That is what they want. They want you engaging in these conversations. And let's be honest, there are a lot of people out there when it comes to social media, they're all about that click, right? The click life and the retweets and all of that sort of thing. So they will say provocative things, or they will go towards the mob mentality in order to achieve that goal. And that's all about ego. And for me, I have to put this in the place where Andy and I talked about it on Wednesday, and I brought up the point of, what do these people on the far right really want? Ultimately, it is my opinion that they want to own people, because that is powerful. So let's take that from the literal into the figurative. When you're owning somebody in a figurative way, it's that same feeling you got as a kid, especially if you had siblings, where you told your parents that one of your brothers and sisters did something and they got punished. That feeling of power that you had influence and you could affect someone else's life. Well, now let's take that into adulthood. And that is the Karen calling 911, right? She knows the implications of what she's doing. She knows that, but that power, I'm going to get one over on you, and I'm going to use my privilege to enforce some action against you to make myself feel better, whether it's justified or not. So all of these go into the white fragility space. And there are lots of really good articles written by therapists who go through the white fragility, because it is a position of power. And I don't want the term white fragility to restrict people into thinking that same example exists in all people. But when we're here in the United States talking about white fragility and performative allyship, we are talking about a group of people who are white or white passing and using that privilege and authority to enforce their dominance over someone else. So this morning, I want to have a really good conversation for the left, because I see far more of the performative allyship on the left than I do on the right. On the right, they're pretty much far out and going, we hate people of color, we hate these groups. We see that, but the problem is...
Understood. Message received.
Right. So it's people on the left, and this is part of where we see the division on the left, because even people who are center or center left have these biases and have that tribal knee-jerk rush of power in exerting themselves over another human being. So this is the conversation this morning. All right. So one of them, and I want to shout out to Mike. He sent this article to me, said that this was a really good one to discuss. And I'm only going to touch lightly on it this morning because I think it adds to this conversation in a unique way, but I do want to talk about it. So what happened over the last few days is a Jewish Antifa group hacked into a Klan website. So these are hacktivists from Israel who hacked into the KKK church website, and they took it over. And in fact, it is still hacked. So I included a link to it, and you can go see what they did. And they went in, took this website, took all the information from it, and they were outing some of these Klan members. And of course, a lot of these Klan members are also criminals, have criminal records. This is not alleged criminal activity. They have been convicted, and there's quite a few pedophiles in here. So it's kind of that corrupting nature of negativity. Like from a religious standpoint, we call it sin. If you're Wiccan, it's negative energies. All of it. If you allow it to feed and grow like a cancer, this is what you're going to get. So you have people who have self-loathing and all of these things coming from a space of criminality and pedophilia and all of just natural to lend itself into hating other people, because I can't hate myself enough. I've got to now do it externally. So this was a good thing, right? The Jewish activists. We would celebrate this, right? Maybe even laugh a little bit. I know I laughed about it. Here's what I want to point out. That this Jewish hacktivist group, the Jewish Antifa, something that gave me pause about their action was they themselves on their communication says, we have solidarity with all oppressed people. And I went, have you met the Palestinians? Where are you for them? So not to bring this down, but I want to put this in a space where here we have one group who's doing something against the Klan because the Klan hates Jewish people. Well, they hate a whole lot of people, but in particular, they hate Jews. Jews will not replace us. You remember Charlotte? Where they were? Yeah. So this is a good thing that they did. But then the performative allyship with oppressed people, they forget their neighbors. They forget what's going on in the Palestinian community within the borders. So this is just one example where I'm like, okay, you're on the right path. Just take one more step. Take one more step into a place that is hard and uncomfortable, and sit with it for a while and think about it. If you really are who you say you are, maybe that's the space you need to go into too. Maybe you need to turn around and look in the mirror, right? So that was Wednesday, self-reflection about us in the United States. This is my comment and my thoughts on, I love their action, but I need you to go one step further.
Yes,
with this.
and realize that you're growing as a human being or people or a group, right? And understand that if you think that you're at the epitome of progressivism, you're not. You never can be, right? The idea of being an ally is keeping your mind open and learning and constantly learning how to be a better progressive, how to be an ally, and how we all, rise as a people, right? First, everybody gets a boat, and then the tide rises us all together. There aren't groups of people that are excluded from that, right?
Yeah, and your analogy of the boat, this is the core of the conversation here, because it's not just performative allyship, it's also the conversation of censorship. Censorship is a way to demean and silence people, especially those thoughts and ideas that we don't like. And we have said it before. We had a guest, Nick, on Brandon's program, DLF Live. He said this quote, and I just love it so much. The antidote to fascism is progressive policy. And if we truly believe that, then we can never be in support of censorship, ever. And this is where the performative allyship really comes to a head with progressive policy. Can you be for censorship and still be a progressive? So that's a question that I want people to sit with as we go through the rest of this conversation. But real quick, good morning, Dave. Thanks for joining us this morning. We missed you on Wednesday. And he said, what about, come on, Dave. Dave says, what about the oppressed and canceled white people? Well,
Okay, you're officially the head.
Yeah, Dave, you get to be the champion of the oppressed and canceled white people. So yeah, let's go through that. So in my mind, and I've said this before, I didn't necessarily want my Trump people, the MAGAs, the hardcore MAGAs, I didn't want them canceled. I need to know where they are. So the parlay hack, I was all about that. I love that. I need to know what the risk is to me. Because while I'm trying to reach out and help these people come back from where they are, because these are our friends and family, I also have the need to be protective of my person. You know, like the guy that we talked about on Monday who had five pipe bombs and was arrested trying to blow up Gavin Newsom and a couple of the social media spaces. I need to be aware of those too. Don't necessarily want them canceled because I want to know which member of Congress is saying these horrible things. If we push them into a dark space through censorship, I don't get to know. Okay, so Brandon weighed in. He said, except in the case of fascist apologist Karl Popper. You know what? I want to hear that too. I want to have that conversation too, because I have no fear of sitting down with a fascist and having a conversation and being able to come out on top, because that is how confident I am in the metrics, the data, the social stack, all of these things that relate around progressive policy. I am so confident that I can make the case from any perspective, whether it's religious, financial, or whatever, to advocate for progressive policy. And if you are not in that space and you fear having an outright fascist in conversation with you, then I would say the onus is on you to learn the policy a little bit better. And we're here to help with that. So stay tuned. Yeah, so Andy, let's go for our first graphic because I want to talk about, I love these graphics because it gives you the 4 stages of allyship. And some of the things, I'll go through some of the examples of what these things are, so that we can recognize it in ourselves when we're doing these things. Before I begin this, I will full disclosure, I am currently pursuing, I'm pursuing action, not in court, but I'm pursuing action against censorship of my own journalist's reputation against YouTube. They labeled me QAnon, because I was saying some things about Biden and Kamala Harris and their donors. So automatically YouTube labeled me as QAnon, even though I was using the FEC data and the campaign database submitted by the campaigns for Biden and Harris. So that is my conflict of interest.
Yes, how dare you?
I know. But I just want to be honest about it. So
yeah.
Okay.
And there seems to be a lot of that going on right now, isn't there?
Right. Okay. So Brandon's okay. I've heard this argument, Brandon. So hold on one there. The paradox of tolerance states that if a society is tolerant without limit, its ability to be tolerant is eventually seized or destroyed by the intolerant. Karl Popper described it as the seemingly paradoxical idea that in order to maintain a tolerant society, the society must be intolerant of intolerance. And I'm going to call bullshit on that one. That is a fear-based statement, because and we've seen this before in history, and we can pull this apart very easily. We saw the rise of fascism in this country in the 1920s. We had rallies. Madison Square Garden was full to capacity with outright fascist and Nazi sympathizers. What happened? Post 1932, going into the FDR era, fascists went away. Their numbers declined, and the remnants that were left over were there because of the effect of FDR's policies. And if you don't believe me, we can do an entire show on that. This is where progressive policy works. Another example is when you work in a government office like the EPA and they're paid in bands. Everybody knows what those bands are, and they know what the requirements are to move to the next band within your workplace. You will not have the same disagreement and racial strife there, because everybody knows what everyone else is paid, and they know that the pattern is not an arbitrary measure, but there's an actual path. You can go from a G6 to a G7 and get that pay rate. You will not see the exact same drama that you see in a corporate workplace, where I find out that Sally is making $3,000 more than I am, but I do more work, right? So this is where progressive policy is tried and true and has been tested. When we had all of the FDR policies come out, because let's remember, FDR was not a liberal. FDR was not a progressive. He himself, when you go back to his quote, say, hey, we got to let off some steam here of the public. We've got to do something for the people, and they did. That is where progressive policy negates all of that. How many fascists were jailed when? Now or then? Now it's like 5? I don't know. Then I don't know. I can look that up for you, Brandon, but I'm calling bullshit on that entire fear-based statement. I have no fear of talking to anybody. Like Kellyanne Conway, absolutely, bring her on. I have no fear of being able to have a rational conversation with her about progressive policy. She may not be rational, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I can be, and for all the people watching, I will be able to make my case in a cogent, rational, thought-based argument. And I guarantee you I'll be able to convince more of the audience that was for her to side with progressive policy. No fear whatsoever. I've done it many, many times. And it's always come out the same way. So, all right. So the tolerance of Nazi presence in the country resulted in passive This is Brandon again. The tolerance of the Nazi presence in the country resulted in the passive acceptance of fascism as a political methodology. America did business with fascist sympathizers before and after World War II. Sure did. They absolutely did.
That's capitalism.
Right, that's capitalism. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And Brandon's point is, arguing with a pig only gets you dirty, no fear required. Well, stick around, Brandon, because that's exactly what we're going to do. So, all right. First graphic, which one did you put up? Putting up?
Authentic allyship.
Okay. So, in the space of authentic allyship, this is the goal. This is where all of our white brethren want to be. And it's particularly when it comes to this month, Black History Month, which my personal opinion is every month should be Black History Month, because we set aside a particular month in recognition that we have erased Black history from the United States. Therefore, we need to highlight it in just one month. But this should be not just 1 month, but we should be integrating all of these. Madam C.J. Walker, all of these folks. Like, I am right now going to put up a fence in my land that I purchased. And it's extraordinary that I was able to purchase this land here in New Mexico, where it's really low cost, and I'm going to fence it with barbed wire that was created by a black man. So this whole manifest destiny that the United States portrayed was actually enabled by the invention and design of a black rancher. But who knew that, right? So these are the things that need to be incorporated in all of our education systems from elementary all the way up. So as we get into Black History Month, this is where it becomes particularly important for white allies to recognize where they are. And these are the goals, right? So this lists out exactly what we should be doing as white allies in this particular space. So hang on, let me pull up the graphic. So, oh, that's the wrong one. Okay, so education. Andy, you said it. Educating yourself, right? Like there was this feed on Twitter. How old were you when you learned about Black Wall Street? And it was just fascinating to me because all of the people who are trying to be authentic allies, white folks or passing white, all of them said 28, 30, 35, 40. None of them said an age below the age of 18 because we're not teaching it. So these were people that are learning it, which is why, by the way, on the 12th, we've got that really great movie coming out, Judas and the Black Messiah, about Fred Hampton. So go watch those movies. Go and learn about our history. This is not Black history. It's our history. So educating yourself is really, really important. And this is the big one. And this is where I think that our own conversation within our group went off the rails. You're taking risks and holding yourself and others accountable. So just a few minutes ago, I brought up the Israeli hackers. And this is where I asked them, okay, if you're really about marginalized people, take a look at your own neighbors. And that is a risk. That is uncomfortable. In the conversation that we were having with our particular group, holding others accountable. So this conversation started on Twitter with one of our own, Rome, who is always provocative. But there was a white woman who was holding Rome accountable because he was part of the Force the Vote effort. And that caused a huge rift within the leftist community because there's some people who put their ideation over a politician, in this case AOC, above progressive policy and what we believe we stand for. So they were really angry that some people were trying to hold these politicians accountable. And so they took it out on their comrades on the left. And so this conversation started because one white woman was really upset that one of our own, a black man, Rome, was holding AOC accountable for lying to the public. And let's be honest, she did lie when she said that Medicare for All would not pass because PAYGO was an obstacle. That is an outright lie, an outright lie. And if you go back and read Representative Jayapal's bills, and Andy, you and I covered it. We covered it multiple ways where this is not hamstrung by PAYGO, but you had AOC out there on multiple occasions saying it was, rather than educating people about what PAYGO is and what Medicare for All is and how it is a zero addition to the deficit. She went out and told people it was a lie. So this is where you had Force the Vote and all of this sort of thing.
Right. And one thing I did want to mention about that is that AOC's roots come from one of her very good friends, even before while she was still working as a waitress or wherever, before she'd even had thoughts to run for Congress, was Anders Bernal, who is a advocate for MMT. So she is very familiar with how macroeconomics works in the United States and realizes that there is no such thing as PAYGO, right? So to use that, not to show my age and go back to the 90s, but things that make you go,
That's exactly right. And shout out to Andres. Thank you for the good work. We see you. We know what you're doing. So thank you. But yeah, so at the top of this Twitter conversation, I posted the link there. So go and read it for yourself. I'm not trying to dox somebody, but it's a good example of how allyship kind of goes off the rails because of what I believe is pride. So it started with that, where you had one person who was outraged by that. And it could have been a person of any particular color who was outraged, but it's the next step that happened that that I personally am offended by, particularly as somebody who's white and on the left. So so here on this chart, you can see the rest of it, and I'll get to the rest of this Twitter thread when we go through some of the other charts, because it starts here, and then this thread kind of goes through the rest of these. And I wanted to bring attention to some of these and some various examples. So the other part is not about you, right? So if you as a white person are sitting with these conversations and you're starting to, if you have the temptation to go I, me, and my, stop yourself. Stop, set it aside, and come back to it, because it's not about I, me, and my right there. So one of the examples that I really want to call out of authentic allyship is we saw this on the West Coast when you had the wall of moms at the Black Lives Matter, because they could see what was happening to the crowd. And it was a mixed crowd, but it was a crowd out there about we need to hold police accountable. And it is not acceptable that we have so many of our Black brothers and sisters who are being killed indiscriminately by police and not being held accountable. So when you saw them being tear gassed and beaten and everything else, you saw the wall of moms. And they were all white women. And that is authentic, where I am saying, you don't have to go to this extreme, but you are saying, I am putting my white body and all of my privilege at the front line and putting myself at risk for you. So that is me standing back by being in the front line so that I will take it and you can speak because it's your right. Okay, so there's a difference between, I am not a white person giving you space, so I don't give you anything. What I am doing is I'm giving myself for this purpose so that you can do what you need to do. Now my dog's.
Oh, Finn's agreeing with you.
He is, and he's just the nosy old lady. So let's go to the next one, Andy.
Alrighty. Weaponized white fragility.
Oh, I love this one. Okay, so this is where this Twitter thread took off, right? So here's where pride got in the way. I am going to disagree with you about your stance on whatever it is, He Who Shall Not Be Named, the comic, the Jaghole comic, and, AOC. So you have these two icons, and people are divided in what they believe should have happened. So that part of the conversation fell flat. So what does a white woman do? Well, I can either come up with a better argument, or I can go the Karen route. And that is what she did. She said, okay, well, since I am not successful in my first argument, I'm going to pull some evidence, manufactured or otherwise, conflate it into something that it's not, and in essence, do the exact same thing as calling Twitter 911 on you. I'm going to dox you and tell everyone else that you are X, Y, and Z, even though I know it's not accurate, but I want to bring the entire mob of people against you because I was unsuccessful in feeling good about my argument from the get-go. So,
not only that, but she also grouped him with other people, to in a way to show that these people are all the same. Right. I'm going to throw those names out there and and that is also going to co-opt you into the group of people that are on that list with you.
And she can get away with it. She can get away with it for a couple of reasons, right? So this is where in my whiteness, I have privilege. First, if you're a pretty white woman, we all know you get chips for that. And then if I claim to be a leftist, all I need on Twitter is a rose, right? If I claim to be an ally, whether I actually am or I'm not, if I hide behind, well, I'm a Black Lives Matter supporter, then I'm taking all of this stuff and shielding my fragility into this performative cover in order to dox you. So Andy, you're right. It's like me saying, well, Andy, you agree with Hitler, therefore, or Andy, you're just like Hitler, or you're just like Trump, or we see this all the time. We're getting this now from Blue MAGA, where I'm getting called a Trump supporter, a Trump sympathizer, or a Republican. These are all things that are meant to marginalize, diminish, and subvert you. And in this space where we have a white woman doing it and a bunch of her white friends coming after a black man, now we have a different context. Now we have the cancellation and weaponized white fragility to try and silence a black man, one that we obviously don't agree with.
Right. So, and we've seen that the reason that happens is because it's successful, right? Like, but we know that the Dem elitists, or for a more general term, like the moderate Dems that are, considering the size of the population, not the majority, certainly by a long shot, but they control the narrative, right? Because of the Democratic Party and the mainstream media, right? And so it's very easy to co-opt something and let's put your spin on it with the backing of, the media that represents your interests.
Right. Exactly. It was the same thing as taking the interview that I did and putting a QAnon thing on it, right? So anybody who's at the left who might have listened to what I had to say will not now, because I had been co-opted with the QAnon label. They're going to go, oh, well, she's just a Republican, or she's one of those crazy people, or whatever. So it's the same censorship, but with a racial component to it. And the person who introduced the racial component was the white woman in this, right? So this is where things really went off the rails. And yes, I did invite her onto our program this morning. I didn't hear back from her. I've spoken to Sally before. Rome actually interviewed her, and I had the pleasure of speaking with her. So I wanted her to come on to have this conversation, pull it apart, not in an accusatory way, but so that we could go through it.
Yeah, the idea is to discuss it and move forward together as allies, right? Mm-hmm. It's to, okay, well, my point is this, right? And then you have a discussion based on that. Not the typical, well, you're stupid, no, you're stupid, no, you're stupid, no, you're stupid conversation that happens on Twitter every day, right? The idea is to be constructive about so that you can open the eyes of someone that doesn't understand or agree with you, right? That there's not enough of that happens in society, and that's the major problems, right?
All right, here's an interesting question that Brandon has posed to us. Okay, so Brandon says, but is she coming after all black men or a black man? Andy, when it comes to white fragility, doesn't matter.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. So what we're saying is, well, this person came after a woman, right? AOC was attacked, and she talked about her own challenges and terror when it came to sexual abuse. Is she talking about, if somebody's coming after her for that, do I segment it and say, well, that's AOC, who gives a shit about her? Or do I say, wait a second, no, you don't go after survivors like that. That's not okay. Because if you're going after her, then you're creating a space where I can become a victim and be in the same spot, right? That is the whole basis, the whole logical framework for the cheetah face eating party, right? The cheetah is going to eat their faces, not mine. So if you go after a black man and equate him to Candace Owens because you lost a prior argument about AOC enforce the vote. Is that okay? I am saying it's not. And if you're going to make the case that it's okay to go after a black man and incorrectly equate them with Candace Owens and all of these other things, then what you are doing is creating the space where they can come after you. And so I would remind progressives, is all of us or none of us? So you decide where you want to be in that. And that's something that you're going to have to sit with and consult. So the other part of this is when it comes to this particular chart, making a space. So I've heard this many, many times in this performative allyship. I'm going to step back and create a space for somebody. And I had to explain this to someone not too long ago who's not from this country and didn't understand. I'm like, yeah, that's latent racism, latent bigotry that person doesn't recognize because they don't give you anything. They can't give you anything. And it's that aggression, microaggressions that white people, we tend to engage in. Right? Like, I own this space, I own Twitter, I own the messaging, I own the argument, and I am but allowing you to comment and all of these pieces.
And I do understand, and I think that getting over that hump is challenging, right? Because people generally want to be good allies, right? And they're trying to overcome the white nationalist racism propaganda that the U.S. has been spewing since its inception, right? But the part of that is that you have to realize of what you're doing, right? There was a story that I really enjoyed listening to, and it was one of the very first gatherings in the U.S. by a performer, right? And they took all the precautions. They made sure everybody had a mask. They kept everybody separated. And it was Dave Chappelle that decided to do some comedy on his own property outside to keep everybody safe. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't too long after the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests beginning in earnest, right? And he said that it was really difficult because he was under a lot of pressure in the media or by people just in general to come out and weigh in about this, right? And he resisted that pressure. And he said, the reason I did is because I am not everybody's spokesperson just because I'm a black man, mm-hmm. right? The streets are out there speaking for themselves right now.
Yeah.
You need to listen to their voice or its voice, right? Not mine. And that's huge. And that's the whole concept about what we're talking about here is you are not the enabler of persons of color. You do not give people permission to speak. You do not represent people of color, right? You certainly don't speak for them. Mm-hmm. So to call out someone of color, to tell them that they must react or act a certain way is exactly what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard lesson to learn, but that's one of the most important ones, that people speak with their own voices. That's not for you to enable or not enable.
Yeah, and I want to take that one step further. Not only do they speak with their own voices, but they get to say what they want to say, right? Even if you don't agree with it, and that's part of that censorship piece, right? So we all know that Rome is very evocative, and sometimes he's doing it in a mischievous way, right? So, but he said what he said, and that is his space. That is his agency to say whatever he wants. And I don't, as a white person, get to tell him when and how and what he may say. And no one gets to tell him when and how and what he may say.
Exactly.
I can engage in an argument, and I can do so from a place of integrity And that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes, yes. Rome doesn't need you to make that space for him. He doesn't need you to be the blocker for the running back, okay? You just need to sit back and listen to what he's saying. If you have a problem with what he's saying, then you have a problem with him, and you argue based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will fully and 100% support his right to say it, even if I don't agree, right? And there's a difference, Brandon, there's a difference between political free speech and talking about these social issues and violating an SEC rule about communication in a live stream. Huge difference, right? So one is a legal framework about decency laws, which I think maybe we all need to review. And the other is political free speech on a private Twitter account. So do we understand the difference? Okay. So let's go to the next slide, because I think these other two are a little more subtle. And these are the places where most of us have tripped, particularly as white people coming from what we learned as children throughout our entire upbringing and what we do as adults. So what's the next one you've got?
White fragility.
Okay. Let me get to that one. White fragility. Okay, so this is, we've all had this as white people. When that first emotion, I remember reading the biography on Malcolm X, Alex Haley. And throughout the entire time I was reading it, that sick feeling, the defensive feeling, the anger, that is your first indication of white fragility, right? I didn't do this. I wasn't there. I had nothing to do with this. It's not on me. Yeah, it is. It is, because even though you weren't personally there when these events took place, even though you weren't necessarily there when all of these policies were set into place, even though you may not be the one who's holding the rope and dragging a man through Texas 5 years ago, when we don't acknowledge where we are, when we are faced with a question of, if you believe that you are completely innocent in this, would you today change places with a person of color, a black person? And would you accept being treated in the exact same way as they are? And if the answer is no, yes, we are all part and parcel to it. So now what do we do about it? So it's that uncomfortable realization going from not me to, yeah, me. Yeah, I'm responsible. I am my brother's keeper. That is that white fragility. And again, there are lots of really good articles about where this comes from and how to process it, so that when it does happen, you get that moment, that momentary pause, and you are not reflectively acting in a way that is going to be negative going forward.
Right. And I on top of that, one thing that I observed a lot in our society is it's easy to be an ally to a progressive policy if it doesn't directly affect you. Mm-hmm. Right? You know what I mean? And then if it does, there's a lot of people that will say, oh, well, maybe I was wrong about this. Now it's affecting.
Yeah, Medicare for All is a prime example, right? Mm-hmm. Medicare for All, or free college, which free is, we pay for it through public money, but I've already paid my student loans. Why should you get the benefit when I'm not recognizing that I actually get the benefit? So Medicare for All, if I have good corporate-backed insurance, Medicare for All might be scary for me, and that might affect me. So I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Or my favorite celebrity politician just told me that it's not possible. So I'm going to push back on you because I would rather push back on you. I don't have an emotional vested interest in you the way that I do with this politician. So those are your examples of that uncomfortable space. So, okay, so white fragility I think is pretty easy. That is that knee-jerk reaction, that first negative emotional wave that we all get from time to time. I still get it. Everybody gets it. So it's a thing. All right, let's do the last one, and we're running out of time here. We could talk for hours.
And sometimes we do.
Yeah.
Performative allyship. Okay,
this is the one that we're going to see most often, particularly on the left space. So, and I've seen it weaponized in reverse, which is really creative communication. So, like, for example, you have a gentleman out of Nashville, a white gentleman, who was organizing a Black Lives Matter in collaboration with people of color, particularly Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other things. And he was in the background and just using his time and talents while pushing those people forward, making sure those who were comfortable being in the spotlight had the credit. Those who weren't, you work with them, but you keep their identities quiet. And what happened was 3 white women came out and took this white man and said that he had organized this Black Lives Matter rally without any of the leadership within the Black community, and he was using it. And he's like, no, that's not what's happening. So here's what was going on behind the scenes. These 3 white women were trying to subvert and derail this rally, and they did it by pulling a white ally and trying to dox him. So it was just really creative jujitsu, and what had to happen was the persons of color. There were 3 Black women and I want to say a couple Black men who were actually doing the organizing, had to finally step up and say, no, none of that's true. We've done X, Y, and Z. This person is just helping us with web and advertising. So this, understand the underlying impetus for some of these things. Sometimes it's not a personal challenging situation with performative allyships. Sometimes it's actually co-opting, right? And I believe, it is my personal belief that pushback on force the vote, I see the pattern. I see DNC written all over this division, because what better way to derail progressive action than to divide and conquer? And that's exactly what happened with the force the vote. They went after a personality and not the policy, right? So that's how you deflect. So this is performative allyship in politics. When we're talking about the social part of it, everyone's doing it, so I don't have to. That's and this, going back to Rome, he said, where did the Beckys go? Well, Biden got elected, so I don't have to protest. And how many times do we hear that?
Yes.
And we're still hearing it. So
exactly.
So virtue signaling is awesome. Centering yourself. Yeah, white people, when we're talking about these issues and places, it's okay to consider it in your head about where you fit into this space and what you can do from a positive thing. That's part of sitting with your own fragility and going through the policy. But when you speak it into reality and start to talk about I, me, and my, now you're in a different place. Now you're making it all about you. And going back to that Twitter thread with Rome, that's exactly what she did. So first you had, I could not defend my argument reasonably. Now I'm going to co-opt the conversation and make it about you in this completely inaccurate comparison to Candace Owens. And then I'm going to bring it back to me I am now injured and hurt, and you did this to me, and how dare you, fragile white woman, cue the tears.
Yes. Bad black person. Bad black person.
Right. And so, so I want to call out the behavior, not the person, because we are all capable of great, wonderful things. We are also capable of great negative things and doing damage to others. So I use this as an example of exactly where it went off the rails. And oh, by the way, Rome keeps getting canceled on Twitter because of people who keep doing this, right? So it's not, Rome may say something that people don't like, but then I have personally seen the K Hive swarm his channel and get him doxxed. I have personally seen corporate Dems swarm his channel and get him doxxed. Oh, by the way, if you're totally okay with that, then this network is next. And I want you to understand that. Like I said, I am personally fighting censorship because corporate didn't like what I had to say about Biden's PAC donors. And if you're okay with one part of it, then you're actually aiding and abetting this other piece. And it goes not just from the progressive message, but also to persons of color, right? So we've heard this so many times. They came for my neighbor and I said nothing.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And
of course. And we're seeing that in real time right now, right? Like, I mean, there's, we're scheduled to do an interview on Macro and Cheese with Jordan Sheridan, right? And what's happened just over the last couple of days with Status Quo and the Convo Couch, and all those people have all been sent messages by YouTube saying that none of your videos can ever be monetized again, right? Which is the sole income stream for these people that are doing this full time, right?
Yeah.
Why is this happening? And YouTube is not giving anybody the opportunity to be able to really to do anything about it. And they're just saying, okay, well, your videos are all about, dangerous content, without showing examples, without explaining
dangerous content.
And just shutting it down. Well, who does that sound like?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's exactly right. So I hope that by at least sitting with this conversation and going through the examples that we gave you here, you can see what a slippery slope it is, right? So when Biden's team is talking about censoring social media and clamping down, the words they actually used were clamping down, then we get into this space where all bets are off. So you as a Black person could be canceled. You as a progressive can be canceled. You as a liberal can be canceled. All of these things start to happen, and these are the marks of fascism and authoritarianism. Push back. Even if I don't agree with this person saying something, let them say it. Let them say it, because I can follow up with an argument to make them look like a complete and utter fool. I have no doubt about that. So don't censor them, because then I'm asking for myself to be censored. So if anyone else has questions or wants to explore these ideas about allyship, authentic allyship, I will find some more links for you. And then I think we're overdue to have Dominique back on. We talked about having her once a month. So Black History Month is a good time to have her back to sit and talk about some of these topics, because I love that Dominique has such a unique perspective, because she's passing white. So she kind of has a foot in both worlds and sees it from multiple perspectives. And knowing her on a personal level, I've actually seen these things happen to her where she's not white enough to pass, and she will get overt, racist responses just based on the way she looks. And then other times people it's an amazing experience, social experience, just walking down the street with Dominique. So I love her take. One
of our podcasts that comes to mind is the conversation we had with Matt Robinson, who is a student at UMKC and it's just where a lot of MMT leading professors teach there. And so he's a doctoral student in macroeconomics. And he talks about, code switching, right? And being in the academia and, acting a certain way and speaking a certain way. And then when he gets home, right, from school and goes out with his friends, right, how then that changes, right, to a different thing. But then he is also, as a black man, dealing with the same people that all black men deal with the police and the racial profiling and everything that happens. Right? So it's a very, very interesting conversation from someone in that position. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. On all of these conversations, I think if at no other point in time you personally start to go through some of these just in a quiet space, read a book, whatever, take some time to really educate yourself in this month in particular, it's going to go a long way into the way we relate to each other, because we celebrate and recognize our differences, right? So I remember the first time I was at a Black holiday gathering. I was the only white person there, and everybody was making a joke about, what is it, the potato salad, white women and potato salad. And of course, I show up with my homemade, fresh peeled 10 pounds of mashed potatoes, and they were off the hook. Everybody fell out, completely fell out. So that was one of those places where we celebrate our differences and our differences in culture and things like this. And even some of those stereotypes where we can have a good time with it. That's okay. That's positive. That is us sharing laughter and joining together. But the negative side of it is what we really need to recognize, particularly when it comes to the difference between performative allyship, toxic white fragility, and actually being a good ally. So I hope this helps in the conversation.
Or at least get them started anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So Dave, to answer your question, did they back off? No, of course not. Of course not. Still going. So, yeah, it is what it is. So, yeah. All right. But, yeah, that's it for me for Friday, everybody. Yeah, no idea what's coming up Monday. Let's see what the weekend brings. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sure that we'll have the weekend to figure it out, and we probably come up with something. Exactly. So yeah, I have a full day planned. I have a bunch of contractors, all of them Trump supporters, that I'm now going to go and have meetings with. What's interesting to me is I almost have an easier time talking to Trump supporters about politics than I do people on the left. So maybe that's the conversation we're going to have on Monday. So I don't know. Possibilities.
Yeah. Okay. So last thoughts, take us out, Andy.
I'm just going to tell people to enjoy their weekends. Right? Take a couple of days off. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you on Monday. Take care, everyone.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.